Does it still include the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine to support a ceasefire?
Yes, the Prime Minister has always been clear that he's ready to put troops into Ukraine to help reinforce a ceasefire.
The Defence Secretary, John Healey, joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
We're going to be in Ukraine later on in this programme. Last night, I think, and this week generally, Ukraine's been reporting the biggest ever aerial attack from Russia. Do you feel, John Healey, for all the talk of the last 6 months, we're further away from peace in Ukraine than ever?
We're further away from a ceasefire than we want to be. You'll hear from the two leaders later today at the summit about how we are helping lead Europe and others to step up support for Ukraine, both in the fight now and in preparations for a potential ceasefire. But the intensified bombardment of civilians and cities underlines the brutality of Putin's war on Ukraine, but also a war that has cost him over 1 million of his own troops in casualties and has led to him being locked into a long-term war that he thought he would win within a week. So he's failed to secure the strategic wins that he wanted. But this is brutal for Ukraine. They're fighting with huge courage, the civilians and military alike, and they require and have a right to expect greater support from us, and they'll get that as we step up our support for Ukraine and alongside the French for European security.
You mentioned that meeting, and that phrase "coalition of the willing" was used a while ago, and there's going to be another meeting led by Starmer and Macron of the coalition of the willing. Can you confirm whether you'll still be discussing the possibility of sending troops to support any possible ceasefire, or has this pivoted from that to being more about continuing to provide ammunition to Ukraine during the war?
No, we've never stinted in the support to help Ukraine in the fight they face today. But the coalition of the willing, led jointly by France and the UK, detailed military planning in the last few months. Over 200 military planners. You'll hear more from President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer this afternoon on that.
Does it still include the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine to support a ceasefire?
Yes, the Prime Minister has always been clear that he's ready to put troops into Ukraine to help reinforce a ceasefire, if that is reached, to try and reinforce the ability of the Ukrainians in the future to provide the deterrence and defence of their own country, which in the end is the best and ultimate guarantor against any future Russian aggression.
There's been audio emerging from the States that Trump threatened Putin back in his first term, this is, that he would bomb the S out of Moscow if Putin invaded Ukraine, and therefore it stopped Putin invading Ukraine while Trump was first in power. You've seen all the intelligence around the war in Ukraine. Do you believe that? Do you believe there was a threat from the US to bomb the S out of Moscow?
No, I mean, that's a speculation and commentary I'm not going to get drawn into. But what I can tell you is that when I was at NATO with the NATO leaders 2 or 3 weeks ago, that was a determination led by the European nations, with the US involved in the discussions about stepping up support for Ukraine, but also pressure on Putin to do what he says, which is to talk, to come to the negotiating table and take seriously the need for an end to the fighting in Ukraine, and then establishing a long-term peace and future for that country.
I want to ask you about your views on tax, and I know you're not the Chancellor and you're not in charge of it, but you are the head of a department demanding ever more money, which has to come from somewhere. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on where the money should come from. Do you think the wealthy need to pay more for increased defence spending, or we all need to pay more for increased defence spending?
Well, in 2 years' time, over this period, we're increasing defence spending by a record amount since the end of the Cold War. And in this Parliament, we've shown exactly how we're going to pay for that. And we've made that hard decision to switch it directly out of overseas development aid. And look, for the longer term future, it's not for me to make tax policy, certainly not on the media and certainly not months ahead.
But the reason I asked the question, Johnny, I understand that point. I thought you would say that. But we don't have a plan to get to 3.5%. We need to get to 3.5%. That's going to involve a lot more money. I'm just interested, do you believe, as a politician, a principal politician, that to spend more money, which you're demanding that we do, the wealthy should pay more, or we should all pay more?
Well, first of all, just as we've done in this Parliament, we've shown exactly how we will pay for the record increase in defence spending. In the next Parliament, we will do the same as we hit our ambition to spend 3% and then ultimately contribute to the new NATO benchmark of 5% on national security and defence. But my job as Defence Secretary is to make sure that what we spend on defence is the best possible value for money, gets the best possible kit into the hands of our warfighters, and brings the biggest boost to our British industry and British jobs across the board. And that's part of what we're announcing today as part of the French Anglo-UK summit. New investment in new missiles production that will support over 1,600 high-skilled, high-paid jobs, as well as equipping our frontline forces with the kit they need to stay ahead of our adversaries.
That's what your job as a defence secretary is, but as a job as a senior member of a Labour government, your job is to tell us what you believe when it comes to the system of taxation in this country. Dale Vince is a big Labour donor, says that you need to cut what he calls welfare for the rich. Those with the deepest pockets should be taxed more to pay their fair share. Do you believe, as a senior Labour politician, in the concept of a wealth tax to get more money into the system?
Look, I think the best thing to do is look at our manifesto, look at what we've done in our first year. We closed loopholes in the non-dom tax regime. We increased air passenger duty on private jets. We closed loopholes for private equity fund managers, which made changes to capital gains tax. And we brought in a record pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid workers with the increase in the national minimum wage. And as the Prime Minister has said, we will stand by those manifesto commitments we've made to working people on tax at the election.
So that sounds like a long way of saying you do support the concept of taxing the wealthy more highly.
Well, I'm Defence Secretary, I'm not Chancellor.
I understand that, but I'm interested in principle, really. You became a Labour politician for a reason. I'm just interested whether, as a senior Labour politician, we all know the Chancellor needs to raise more money. I'm interested in your thoughts as a senior politician, by going after wealth or assets, that's what Dale Vince, a big donor to your party, says. That's a more moral and acceptable way of raising money. And do you agree with that?
Yeah, look, I'm not making or speculating on tax policy, but it's always been a principle. It was there in our manifesto. It's been there in the actions we've taken in this first year in government. It's a fundamental Labour value that the wealthiest should shoulder the biggest burden of funding the defence spending we need to keep our country safe, and the public services that we need to rebuild after 14 years that have been entirely hollowed out under the previous Tory governments.
The other story around today, around Macron and Starmer, is this pilot scheme to deal with small boat migrants. The Times are reporting that up to 50 small boat migrants will be sent back to France each week, starting from next month, under a one-in, one-out returns deal pilot. That means 800 people sent back by the end of the year, which isn't very many, John Healey. Under your government, 800 people arrive every week. You're going to send back 1 in 17. Are you worried that's not a sufficient deterrent?
Well, dealing with small boats is part of the summit discussions alongside energy, defence, culture exchanges like the bio tapestry coming to London. And we'll see what President Macron and the Prime Minister have to announce later today. But I would say this, for the first time, because we've been able to reset and restore relations with France, this is seen by France as a shared challenge. They are working together with us in a way they didn't before, and that's led to increased joint patrols, more drone patrols, and also to some of the new action we've seen in French enforcement police in the shallows on the French coast. And that's the sort of thing that has helped us stop now 12,000 crossings in this year. But
it's not brought the numbers down, has it, John Healey? That's the point. It's not brought the numbers are higher than they've ever been before.
Well, it's helped us stop 12,000 crossings already this year. There's more action to come when we get the new borders bill through Parliament. There'll be extra counter-terrorism powers to deal with the smuggling gangs. When the French change their laws so that we get some of the action that we saw last week more consistently to deal with the boats in shallow waters, we will be able to do more. But there is no quick or simple single fix to this. But I can say we are determined to bring down the numbers of small boat crossings. We're determined to restore the control of our borders that the Tory government lost before the election. And this work with the French is an essential element of doing just that.
John Healey, I know you're a busy man. Good to speak to you this morning.
Thanks very much.